Just do it. It's one of the most recognizable and catchiest phrases you'll ever hear in marketing. It describes the culmination of many years of trial and error, hard work, and smart business strategy. It led to the rise of the biggest sports brand in the world, and it continues to live on in the minds of people who like to wear sports attire that's both practical and high quality. What is the story behind the phrase? And what was the brand behind it? Stay with us as we give you the lowdown and the happenings. Phil Knight, a kid from Portland, Oregon, had struggled with a lack of meaning and purpose for the better part of his first 20 years on Earth. He had wanted to be many things, but for some reason, the passion wasn't there. Phil stayed like that until he went to the University of Oregon, where he studied journalism. Throughout that time, he developed an interest in sports, specifically running. In fact, he was always into running, even back in the day when his father refused to give him work at his own Oregon Journal. The young Phil would run the whole 7 miles back to his home when he was finished working a job for the rival journal company Oregonian. So, this was nothing new, but still, Phil saw no future in pursuing sports. He was 24 years old at this point, and whether he liked it or not, that age was not suitable for someone who wanted to become an athlete. So the search for meaning continued. After finishing his studies, he tried his luck in the Army. Again, the question was whether he could find something to spur him on to do great things. But the Army didn't provide that. Now he was 25 years old and was no closer to any of his goals in life. Maybe business school held the answers. And so, Phil began studying business at Stanford. Finally, something occurred to him. Studying business, Phil saw the potential of making high-quality sports shoes in America. He was inspired by what the Japanese were doing and wanted to bring that level of quality to the States. It also reminded him of his coach at Oregon University, Bill Bowerman, who was his track and field coach and the person who knew better than anyone how sports shoes were vital for athletes. Of course, we're mentioning Bowerman because the guy would co-found the company with Phil. But let's see first what happened in Japan. So, now Phil had his idea for high-quality, low-cost sports shoes in place. It was time to visit Japan and strike a deal with anyone willing to do business. It was 1962, and Nike, the future biggest sports company in the world, was still a distant dream. You might be thinking that it must have been Phil who came up with the brand name, right? Not really. That credit goes to Jeff Johnson. But first, there was an intermediary name between them. Where would Phil find someone to give his idea a shot? Japan was a foreign place, and he had no contacts to rely on. The only way to find a lead is to go to actual stores selling sports shoes that fit the criteria Phil was looking for. And as luck would have it, Phil found his target. It was there in all its glory. A badass looking, high-quality pair of sports shoes with the brand name Tiger on them. The company behind the brand was called Onitsuka, and this is where the story gets interesting. Onitsuka would play a vital role in shaping Nike's history, as both one of the first partners who supported its rise in popularity and later on as one of its biggest rivals hell-bent on seeing it fail. But first, Phil had to meet the people in charge of the company at this point in time. So, he cold calls the owners, sets up a meeting, and goes on to describe his business plan to them. The owners were quite impressed by Phil's enthusiasm and business acumen, even though we should never forget that Phil, up until this point, was a lost and confused boy who knew nothing about anything. Yet, his passion for bringing those high-quality sports shoes trumped everything. Onitsuka's CEO was impressed, and he gave Phil the green light. He paid a total of $50 for those sample shoes. During the meeting, Phil struggled with one problem. What was the company he represented? There wasn't one. Phil had little money and hadn't started any business venture yet. Sure, he studied business, but he didn't have one. On the spot, and after a lot of thinking and nervousness, he blurted out the name Blue Ribbon Sports. And yeah, that's the name of the company that would give us the brand known as Nike. 5 months after returning to the US, 12 pairs of sample shoes from Onitsuka finally arrived. The problem was, and it would later surface when Onitsuka tried to backstab Nike, how late the order arrived. Right from the get-go, the Japanese company had a habit of going back on their deals, not meeting deadlines, and generally putting their interests first instead of the partnership. For now, however, Phil was ecstatic. It was time to call his old coach, Bill Bowerman, and ask him to dissect the Japanese shoes to see what they did right. From that point forward, Phil and Bill became co-founders of Blue Ribbon Sports, and it was quite a natural progression when you think about it. An investment of $300 was made, and Blue Ribbon ordered an additional 300 Tiger shoes from Onitsuka. It was time to sell those shoes on a large scale all over the US. The first year after this partnership, and Blue Ribbon Sports made $8,000 in profit. This was big. Phil never had that kind of money before, and now expansion was on the horizon. In 1966, the landscape changed forever in the sports business. Blue Ribbon opened its first retail store, taking the company from Phil's house to its first real physical location, and the team expanded, finally welcoming Jeff Johnson into its ranks. Remember, he's the guy who came up with the name Nike, and Jeff filled in Bill Bowerman's shoes when the latter was busy working as a coach. Yearly revenue earnings now totaled $300,000, and all of that was thanks to the Cortez pair of shoes that Blue Ribbon popularized. Business was booming, and Phil's dream idea got real results and took the world by storm. However, betrayal was coming, and it was none other than Onitsuka. You have to understand that the partnership was based on mutual interest. Blue Ribbon sold shoes, and Onitsuka made a profit. It was that simple. Phil now wanted to be their exclusive partner in the US, but Onitsuka had different plans. They initially agreed, but then started acting weird. Later, Phil found out that Onitsuka was putting Japanese customers first, and the US distribution deals second. That was bad for business, but Phil's hands were tied. They also didn't share Bowerman's enthusiasm when he suggested new designs, improvements, and manufacturing ideas to make the sports shoes even better. They even called Blue Ribbon's performance disappointing, citing a lack of strong sales even when all evidence suggested otherwise. As you might have guessed, this spelled the end of the partnership and the official birth of Nike, the biggest sports brand in the world. Nike stood for the Greek queen goddess of victory, and it was quite fitting. Blue Ribbon never had its own pair of shoes. They relied on what Onitsuka provided, so making their own sports shoes with their own brand was the only way to even the scales. In 1971, the change was made, and Blue Ribbon as a company took on the name of Nike. From then onwards, Nike would cross the $1 million threshold of sales per year, expanding to other countries, and staying in the lead against Onitsuka and other big sports brands in the US like Adidas and Puma. Nowadays, the company's valuation stands at $127.53 billion and generates yearly revenue of $46.71 billion as of 2022. It's also responsible for creating some of the most memorable sports ads in history, entering into sponsorship deals with many big players from different sports. After all, who doesn't like Nike's 2018 campaign ad with the slogan "Dream Crazy" written front and center? It causes a frenzy and inspires people to buy from the brand right away. There are a lot of things Nike did right, and a lot of things Phil became known for. Let's see what educational value we can get out of this crazy story of triumphs and failures. Calculated risks. Nike's experienced team of risk management advisors is a big reason why the brand is so successful. They always weighed the pros and cons of a business decision, and when taking risks was necessary, they knew what to do to get the most out of it with little losses. Inspiring leadership. When all sports brands in America conspired to see Nike's downfall, Phil knew he had to boost morale. He got good at giving inspiring speeches that made everyone fight tooth and nail for the brand's place in the market. That kind of leadership is what successful businesses are all about. Always aim to inspire and encourage instead of micromanaging and demotivating your team. Controversy. Whether it was the accusations that they were supporters of child labor and exploitation, or making a deal with Colin Kaepernick, Nike knew how to generate controversy and turn it into massive profit. Obviously, this sort of business strategy needs lots of careful planning to do right, and it can backfire horribly if any element is out of place. So, Phil Knight did end up just doing it. What about you? Do you have your own version of just do it? Want to see what else is out there in the world of finance and business? Then check out the rest of our playlist for more brand success stories and wealth-making adventures.